Welcome back, everyone, to the False Flags and Conspiracy Conference 2024. And we're moving right along here. We've got Dr. Jerome Corsi with us. He is an expert in, well, gosh, I'm just going to say the Barack Obama birth certificate, many other things. Oh my God, you guys, he's written so many books. And by the way, you can go to his website and you can get all of his books. He has a kind of a channel funnel for his books that's quite extraordinary, and I want you to get them because some of them are going out of print soon, and I want you to be sure to get what you can get right now. So Dr. Corsi will tell you how to do that at the end of the presentation or the beginning. But today he's going to be speaking about the final analysis, the JFK headshots. He's the co-author of a new book with David Mantik, and who is the leading expert on medical evidence in the death of JFK. Dr. Corsi will dive into the medical evidence with x-ray proof that there were 3 shots, not 1 or 2, but 3 shots to the head. So with that, I leave you with Dr. Corsi. So take over.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, this is great pleasure and honor to be here tonight. And the work I'm going to be presenting is from the book. I want to share my screen now, if I can. Let's see if I think I have permission to do that. Here's the cover of the book. The book is the book I co-authored with David Mantik. It's entitled The Assassination of John F. Kennedy, The Final Analysis. It was published in March of this year, 2024. And Doug Horn did the introduction and worked with us on much of the book, especially on the work he had done with the Assassinations Records Review Board and in particular, the pre-autopsy surgery that was done on JFK's head. Now, this is really a presentation that Dr. Mantik has given many times, and my role, I've known Dr. Mantik for many years, and I finally said to him, look, his work has been being published for like 30 years. I mean, Jim Fetzer published it first, going back into the assassination science and his other books. And what Dr. Mantik has done is, as a radiation oncologist and a PhD in physics with a specialty in radiation, Dr. Mantik has seen the JFK X-rays at the autopsy X-rays at the National Archives. There are 3 extant JFK skull X-rays from the autopsy, and Dr. Mantik has done optical density measurements of these X-rays, which means taking in a densitometer, which is a scientific apparatus, and millimeter by millimeter, sometimes even finer than that, taking measurements of the amount of light coming through the X-rays, which permits you to get a very accurate determination of what you're looking at. Now, Dr. Mantik had been publishing this material and very scientifically, and as I read it over the years, I realized that the full impact of what Dr. Mantik was saying was not being appreciated by the general public because it was too scientific and too technical. The way, for just a simple example, the way optical density measurements are taken is by logarithms. And today, unfortunately, given the watering down of our schools, very few students are even taught what logarithms are. And so therefore, the mathematical capability of appreciating what Dr. Mantik was saying was largely not fully there. So I suggested to him that what we do is write a book that was based on his research, but combine my ability as an author, best-selling author, and this is my second book on the JFK assassination. So I've been studying the literature since, going back in the 1960s. I was one of the very first people reading this literature, and even the day the assassination occurred, I was 17 years old. I did not believe it was Lee Harvey Oswald from the very beginning. I mean, I from the very first moments I heard of the assassination, I knew it had been a coup d'etat. I mean, I knew as a kid, I had been in Washington many times. My father was a lobbyist with the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen, and he was frequently in Washington. I'd gotten to see the Kennedys. I knew what they were doing, even with the McClellan Committee hearings. And I knew Jack Kennedy did not want to go to war in Laos. He did not want to go to war in Vietnam. Did not want to go in the war in the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was having many issues where the establishment, this New World Order group of CIA, opposed him because he was blocking making billions of dollars if we just went to war in Vietnam at the very end. So the assassination was a shock, but again, I did not believe it was Lee Harvey Oswald. So I've been studying this, and I decided I would collaborate with Dr. Mantik, and we would get this book to be comprehensive, but all the science would go into the appendices, and then we would go through the literature to combine what the public record documented together with what the X-rays showed to make the case that from the very first moments after the assassination, those who were in the know knew Jack Kennedy had been shot from the front and from the rear, and that this was a great lie from the very, very beginning. It was a conspiracy. It was clearly a government operation. It was clearly a coup d'etat. But the forensic evidence, the scientific evidence, is in the X-rays. So much of the work that's been done, the Kennedy assassination, remains speculative and argumentative, especially in terms of the history and the who was involved and the various motivations. And there's lots of this literature that will remain debated for probably many, many more decades to come. Maybe it'll never be fully resolved. But the point is the X-rays give scientific proof of frontal shots. Now I want to zoom in on the cover for a minute to start this presentation. So I'm going to go into a more of a zoom on the cover a little bit once or twice more. And I want to show you where we're going in the presentation. I'm going to give you kind of a summary of where we're headed. Do one more zoom in. Okay, so of course, here's the frame from the Zapruder film, which is a film that, I mean, right at the shot that comes through the windshield and has hit Jack Kennedy in the throat. There's a shot also to the back, the shot to the back and the shot to the throat were the first two shots that hit Jack Kennedy. But then this is right at the point where you can see his arms come up, and you can see, in fact, I'll focus on this later, but you actually see the puncture in the windshield of the shot coming through. But the critical thing is that Kennedy was shot 3 times, once from a low angle from the back of the head at what they call the EOP, the external protuberance in the back of your head. And that was at a low angle, probably from the Daltex building. That was at frame 313, when you see Kennedy's head moving forward, and you see out of the upper right of his head the plume of blood and gore shooting forward. Then almost simultaneously at frame 320, where the red arrow is, a shot hits Jack Kennedy on the temporal bone, which is right by the right ear. You're going to see there's a keyhole entry. We'll talk a lot about that. And it blew out the back right of Jack Kennedy's head. Now, this white area here is a patch, and Dr. Mantik is identified as a forgery, way too bright to have been natural to the X-ray, and it was designed to cover evidence of the frontal shot. Almost at the same time, and by the way, this shot from the that hit the temporal bone by the right ear had to have come from the grassy knoll. The shot that came through the windshield may have came from the south side of Dealey Plaza, across from the grassy knoll, from a shooter who was up by the railroad yard. Okay, and the third shot that hit Jack Kennedy in the head came through the forehead, and as you can see with this blue dotted line, there are fragments of the bullet breaking up, and the largest fragments are in the back, which means it did not exit. You can see that, and the largest fragments, having the most weight, the most momentum, would travel the farthest in a bullet that broke up. So this is clearly a frontal shot. And this is the right forehead. It could have come from further up on the grassy knoll, or it might have come from the other side, the south side of Dealey Plaza up by the railroad yard. It's hard to determine because it's hard to determine the exact position of Jack Kennedy's head at the moment that shot occurred. But it was almost simultaneously with the shot at 3:20, 1 or 2 seconds after the shot from the back of the head hit. So there were all three almost simultaneous headshots, which produced a movement first of Jack Kennedy's head forward and then threw it violently back into the left. Okay, and I'm going to stop sharing this and going to start going into the manuscript. And I don't think we're going to take questions during this, but I don't think it may be a way to take questions. I'll try to watch to the extent I can, the comments and see if there's any questions that are asked. At any rate, the previous
Oh,
presentation we had.
Jerome, if there's any
Yes.
questions at the end, I will read them to you so that
Okay,
everybody can hear them. Okay?
that's good.
Great.
Um, John Costello's presentation also makes clear, and I agree with him, that there's alteration of the Zapruder film, so we don't have an accurate record of the Zapruder film as the actual shooting, which makes it difficult as well to pinpoint the exact timing and location of all the shots that occurred. But the fundamental point I want to make to start is that the X-rays are definitive scientific evidence that Jack Kennedy was shot at least twice from the front. And so that becomes extremely important because it sets aside the idea that Lee Harvey Oswald could have been the lone gun assassin. None of the three shots that hit Jack Kennedy's head came from an angle that would have been at the Texas School Book Depository. So no shots that hit Jack Kennedy's head were fired from that location, according to the evidence, the forensic evidence of the X-rays. Okay, now this is the manuscript. I'm going to start going into the manuscript. I first want to kind of start, and it's been a while since I've done this presentation, so I may have to look for a few things. Stay with me as I search for what I want to show, but I want to start here with figure 2.5, which is the what I want to show you what an optical density a densitometer looks like. So I'm going to search for figure 2.5. And some of the figures here are not exactly the way they are in the book because they got changed a bit as we edited the book. The figures got renumbered and rearranged multiple times. Hold on a second. 1 second. Okay, I'm just going to go up here to figure 2.5. It'll be easier just to find it like this. By the way, the book is a extremely long book. It's about over 500 pages. And we did this on purpose because we wanted to make sure that you got all the detail and density. And it's very, as you can see, I'm going to now share the screen again. It's very heavily not only footnoted, but it's very heavily illustrated. So everything we're talking about, we're showing you evidence of as we're discussing it, which is important in the book because I want in the book to make it clear to you as you were reading it what we were talking about. And so therefore we went to a great extent to make sure we had the right illustrations. This is an optical densitometer. And it's an instrument that sits on a desk. And you can see you put the X-ray in that instrument. And then you lower the arm and a beam of light comes through. And it takes a measurement of the beam of light, which gives you a logarithmic measurement of the amount of light that's coming through the X-ray. And I did a lot to explain how that works because you're looking at X-rays, which are negative images. And so therefore, if it's bone, it's dense, it blocks the X-rays, and that looks white. And the air cavities actually look black because they're transparent to the X-rays. And so therefore, they are going to look black because of how the chemical action of the X-ray works. Okay, so it's a reverse. Okay, but you get to look at them and they become pretty easy to see after a while because your eye adjusts to it and you begin to realize that you're looking at an X-ray, and so therefore it becomes pretty much common sense. Now I want to first go to the X-ray of the headshot that came in here. This figure 2.7 and maybe even 2.8 might be a little bit better. This is I'm gonna enlarge this one, and I assume you can all see here on the screen. I'm going to make it a little bit larger. Okay, now this is a if you take a look at the upper, focus on the upper part here, and you can see here the fragment of the bullet, and follow my cursor, that broke up in the forehead, the right forehead, and the largest fragments at the back, and you can see there's no exit wound. Now that's, to me, the most obvious evidence that there's a frontal shot. That's hard to dismiss. It's extremely hard to dismiss because it's apparent that I think this was and Dr. Mantik thinks this was probably a liquid mercury bullet because it would have been hard to have removed the stain, even if you're trying to remove the bullet fragments. Here's another view where you can see it. The red arrow on the right shows where it entered, and the metal fragments going across the top of the head, I'm sure could not be removed in the pre-autopsy surgery because of the stain to the tissue. And that right there alone should be clear evidence that, this was not Lee Harvey Oswald doing the shooting. Okay, now if we go further into looking a little bit more at this, and Dr. Chesser also did optical density measurements, and he validated the work that Dr. Mantik did to again demonstrate that he agreed that this frontal shot showed all the indications of entering the brain at the right forehead at the hairline and did not exit. So I'm going to go to about figure 3.9 or so here and show you some additional figures that make this point. Okay, hold on, bear with me. Okay, here we highlighted them in yellow, so you can see more clearly the fragments that came in from the forehead, and the two little right spots in the front are bone that are fractured where the bullet entered. And with this kind of evidence, Dr. Chesser completely agreed with what Dr. Mantik had concluded, that namely the frontal shot was the apparent in the X-rays. What Dr. Chesser did is produce a series of also additional images which showed that as the bullet entered the front right of Kennedy's forehead, at the very front, there's little scattered little dust-like particles of the bullet breakup, which again are indicative of a front entry. And there's the entry point. And you can see again the bullets coming across from the entry point and not exiting. Okay, so that's extremely important evidence that has been ignored for 61 years. Now, Dr. Mantik, there's lots of technical information in the book, lots of technical descriptions of how this occurs, etc. And now I want to go to the shot by the right ear. So let me go to some more figures in here. Okay, it forms a keyhole fracture when the bullet enters tangentially, which means it hits the side of your head. It doesn't go through the head. It hits the side and exits at the back, for instance. That's a tangential or oblique shot, like a tangent in geometry. The bullet enters, it forms a hole, but then the bone in front of it breaks apart, and it's like a keyhole fracture. Now, why that's important is because in the X-rays, and here's enlargements of the X-rays, you can see the keyhole fracture by the right ear. One is an unenhanced, and the other is the enhanced X-ray from the House committee that did enhanced X-rays. But this is clear evidence that there was a shot that hit in the right ear and blew out the back of the head. And also, a lot of analysis is done in the book on the Harper fragment, which was blown out from the back of JFK's head and found on the grass to the left of the limousine. And we'll show you the Harper fragment here in a minute. I'm sure everybody's pretty well familiar with it. But it was and we do a lot of the text here. Oh, by the way, here's how you can see the shots. The forehead shot was above, and the shot that came through the temple, the right temple, that blew out the back of the head. So, it stayed intact, whereas this blew out a deep furrow across the bottom of the head, but did not blow out the part at the right of at the tissue at the top of the right quadrant of Jack Kennedy's head where the forehead wound came. And that's the Harper fragment. Do a lot of analysis of that. That's a piece of occipital bone that came from the blowout of the back of Jack Kennedy's head. And the book goes to great length to show this and place it even in among the autopsy photographs. Okay, so that's the Harper fragment from the blowout of the shot. Now I want to go to Parkland Hospital. We're going to stop sharing for a minute. At Parkland Hospital, the physicians came. Jack Kennedy was headed towards Stemmons Freeway, and Parkland Hospital was on the way. So it took very few minutes, to get to Parkland Hospital with Jack Kennedy shot in the limousine. And when they got to Parkland Hospital, they brought Jack Kennedy into Trauma Room 1. The doctors had been assembled from Trauma Room 1 in a panic, knowing the president was coming in and was going to have to be dealt with. Now, the first question for anybody who spent any time in an operating room and a trauma room, at an emergency room, is, can we do anything to save this person's life? And it's not clear you can. The first determination has to be made is, what do we do? Okay, so your consideration is to keep the person alive, and you want to know immediately what actions have to be taken in order to keep the person alive. Now, if I go to some of the discussion in the book, I'm going to go to an earlier part of the book, and we're going to find the when I took the first look. I'm just going to search for a part. Okay, right here. This is where this is a Nurse Perry, oh, I'm sorry, Nurse Bell, who was in the trauma room, and I'm going to put that back here. She said, when I took the first look, I could recognize the president, but I didn't see an injury because there was no injury about his face. Nurse Bell's job was to prepare the operating room if there was going to be an operation. And so she comes in the trauma room to say, what's going to happen? Is he going to come over to the operating room? We're going to operate and try to save him. So she's trying to determine the extent of the injuries right away. And so you couldn't see an injury, and his face looked intact. Where's the injury? Well, Dr. Malcolm Perry was there. He was doing the tracheotomy in the emergency room, and he reached up in the president's head and he pulled it up a bit and he turned it to the left, and there was a gaping hole in the back of Jack Kennedy's head. That's where the brain and fluids were dripping out. It was a wound in the back of JFK's head. It could have been 3 or 4 inches in diameter that I saw. That was her testimony. Okay, now Dr. Robert Perry came in, and he's also trying to figure this out. First seconds of looking at the president. As I took the position at the head of the table that I've already described to help over the tracheotomy, I was in such a position that I could very closely examine the head wound. And I noticed that the right posterior portion of the skull had been extremely blasted. It had been shattered apparently by the force of the shot, so that the parietal bone, the bone at the top of the head, was protruded up through the scalp and seemed to be fractured almost along its right posterior half, the right rear. as well as some of the occipital bone in the back being fractured in its lateral half. And this sprung open the bones that I mentioned in such a way that you could actually look down into the skull cavity itself and see that probably a third or so, at least, of the brain tissue, the posterior cerebral tissue, the back of the head, and some of the cerebellar tissue at the very, very back of the head, different color, the organ at the very back of the head had been blasted out. There's a large amount of bleeding, which was occurring mainly from large venous channels in the skull that have been blasted open. And again, all of these things are indicating Dr. Crenshaw, another doctor who was there, testified into the Warren Commission. I walked to the president's head to get a closer look. His entire right cerebral hemisphere, or the right side of his head, looked like a crater, an empty crater. All I could see was mangled, bloody tissue. From the damage I saw, there was no doubt in my mind that the bullet had entered his head through the front. As it had surgically passed through his cranium, the missile obliterated part of the temporal by the ear, all the parietal by the upper part of the right side of the brain, and occipital lobes in the back before it lacerated the cerebellum at the very back of the head. The wound resembled a deep furrow in a freshly plowed field. Several years later, when I viewed slow motion films of the bullet striking the president, the physics of the head being thrown back provided final and complete confirmation of a frontal entry by the bullet to the cranium. Okay, now what's clear from the doctors in Parkland, and recently there's been released a video on Paramount, I believe, of the doctors talking about this. The doctors at Parkland all thought that Jack Kennedy had been shot in the emergency room. They saw at least twice from the front. They saw a throat wound, which is a puncture wound, which was obviously an entry wound. They saw the back of the cranium blown away. That was an exit wound. That had to come from the front. Now, they didn't know if the throat wound had caused the exit wound. They didn't know how it had happened. And within a very short time, Jack Kennedy was pronounced dead because the doctors, at Parkland Hospital, pronounced Jack Kennedy dead at 12:38 p.m. Central Standard Time. I mean, they had very, very little time to get him to the emergency room and decide that he was dead. He was logged in at 10:38. I'm sorry, he was logged in at 12:38 Central Standard Time, and he was pronounced dead at 1 o'clock. But they actually waited a little bit to pronounce. They knew before 1 o'clock that he was dead, and the doctors basically said, "Stop it. We're not going to save this man. So quit trying." And they did. Now, what ensued from there was that the coroner showed up, Earl Rose, and he said, "I'm going to basically, this is a murder in Dallas. It's not a federal crime, and I'm going to do the autopsy." And so there was actually, the Secret Service had called a local moratorium and got a ceremonial casket, and the nurses and the attending physicians, the attending medical personnel in the trauma room put Jack Kennedy's body wrapped in sheets into the ceremonial casket, and the Secret Service pulled their weapons and took the body out at gunpoint. They said Jack Kennedy's body coming back to Washington for the autopsy. Now, one of the next things I want to demonstrate to you is that the Secret Service, at the time the shooting occurred, knew that Jack Kennedy had been shot from the front. And from the time the limousine had arrived at Parkland, the doctors were in the process. I mean, the Secret Service was in the process of taking a pail and water and washing down the back seat of the car to alter the crime scene. And when people saw that there had been a puncture wound through the front of the windshield, it looked like a bullet hole coming from the front, Secret Service cordoned off the limousine and made sure people didn't photograph it and got the limousine out of there. That's hiding evidence from the very beginning. And the limousine, as we demonstrate in the book, was changed in Dearborn, Michigan over the weekend. In fact, there were several changes in the windshield, such that the original windshield is now long gone and destroyed. I want to show you one other figure here. If I can, let me pull this up for a moment. I'll get this shared in a second, but let me get it first on my screen. I want to show you the amount of detailed work that Dr. Mantik has done. And I think any of the people, who, as Jim Fetzer said, just as an introduction to my presentation, that, Dr. Mantik's work is some of the most important work that has been done on the assassination, in that his scientific measurement of the X-rays shows that the shooting did occur from the front. And that's extremely important. I mean, many of the contributors, especially many of those speaking here tonight, have made seminal contributions. This is now a growing body of literature that I think is becoming almost indisputable, that we've been lied to for 61 years. And that has been a accumulation of all this work that's been done by the JFK scholars, etc. But I've always been especially impressed by the X-ray analysis because it's scientific. Now I'm going to share this so you just get a sense of how, and I want to make it clear that all the work I'm reporting on is Dr. Mantik's work. My job has been, again, to be an interpreter, a commentator, to be able to write it up so people can understand it, put it in the context of all the JFK literature. These are individual measurements you can see all around of his optical density measurements. These are actual notes that Dr. Mantik made in the archives. It's meticulous scientific work. And I'm not going to go into the evidence of the X-rays being forged, but there's clear evidence that the 3 X-rays that are in the archives were forged to hide evidence of frontal shots. Okay, now I'm going to switch to some of the Zapruder film, because I want to demonstrate a couple of the critical aspects of how the optical density evidence of the X-rays ties together with the testimonial evidence of the shooting itself, so that we can put this together and say, that those who were witnessing it really knew from the very beginning that Kennedy was shot from the front. Okay, so hold on one second. I get here, figure 5.4. I'm going to that site right away. Let me just pull it up here. Save a second. The one of the problems you have in the assassination was that the almost immediately after the assassination, the plane takes off to go to Washington, and Lee Harvey Oswald is apprehended, and almost immediately the evidence is out there that Lee Harvey Oswald is the assassin, and that he was shooting from the Texas School Book Depository. And the Dallas police are in the process of pronouncing him guilty in the first few minutes, like they've got a conclusive case. Now, the problem with all of this is the 2 films that were really important here, Zapruder's film, which of course has been altered, and the Altgens film, which again also can have been argued to have been altered. But the Altgens photograph was taken. He was an AP photographer. He's standing in front of the limousine when the shooting started. And so he has a picture that was very famous of the bullet hitting Jack Kennedy. Hold on a second. Coming through the windshield. I just want to show you that quickly. One second. Okay. And Dr. Mantik's done extensive work on all of this. It took us over a year to write this book, and that for me is a long time. But if I can find it here, I want to show you the Altgens. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the Altgens photograph, but it is shows Jack Kennedy. Here it is, right here. I saw it a minute ago. Here's Jack Kennedy coming up to the shooting occurs. The Alchin's photograph shows that Jack Kennedy, the Texas School Book Depository, was behind the limousine when the shooting occured. There's a blow up of the Alchin's photograph colorized. You can see the Texas School Book Depository in the background. By the way, the circle shows a bullet hole where the bullets coming through the windshield. And we have several of the images from the Zapruder film, which also show the bullet hole in the windshield. There's another one that's frame Z230. And the red circle shows the reflection of the bullet hole puncturing the window and then coming into Jack Kennedy's throat. So the Alchin's photograph showed the Texas School Book Depository was behind Jack Kennedy. The shooting occurred. And that's where Oswald was shooting. All the shots had to come from the back. He was the lone gun shooter. But clearly the body showed that there were frontal shots, including the press secretary at Parkland Hospital traveling with the White House that put his finger to his forehead and said it was a simple matter. Jack Kennedy was shot through the head. And they knew there was a forehead wound even at Parkland Hospital. Although the doctors attending Jack Kennedy in Trauma Room 1 had not paid attention to the forehead wound. Okay, now, as we go through the shooting sequence, and I want to get some of those pictures here. Hold on just 1 second, and I'll find where I have those. And bear with me because the book is complicated. There's so many of the different sections I'm flipping through to show different parts that I want to, if you'll bear with me a minute, I'll get to the ones I want to show you. Here we go. 3, 4, 1, 12. The sequence with Clint Hill running to the front of the car are very important because they putting together his testimony and the testimony of others with the shots and with the x-rays tells a very, I think, definitive picture. Okay, so I'll enlarge these a bit. Okay, so Jack Kennedy's head is hit at 411, 413 in the back. But one of the this is one of the key. Stop the share, and I'm going to share it again. At frame 331, you can see Jack Kennedy. The right side of Jack Kennedy's head explodes. Now, it's always amazed me why this has not been focused on as one of the most important frames. I think it's possibly one of the most important frames in the entire film, because you can see Jack Kennedy's head's going forward. It's been hit by the shot from behind at 313. This is a 331. The shot's hit his left by his temple or the grassy knoll. It's just exploded. And this is where the headshot gets thrown. The head gets thrown violently back into the left. Okay, so this is now 343. And there are two separate shots that cause those motions. That's the key point. Okay, so if we get here and we go back to a more reasonable, Clint Hill is climbing up, and Clint Hill is sprayed to the left with Jack Kennedy's brain and blood matter. So is the officer here, the inboard officer, is sprayed with Jack Kennedy's blood matter. In fact, you can even see, and again, I've often wondered why this has not been emphasized more, but you can even see on the hood of the car traces of the blood and gore from Jack Kennedy's head. Jackie, of course, starts coming out of the car, and she reaches a part of Jack Kennedy's head on the left rear. So all of this action is from the right front, hitting Jack Kennedy's head and throwing his head violently back, and all the gore is coming out to the back behind to the left. Jackie Kennedy gets what she wants, and she goes back in the car. And in fact, Some of what Greta Dunkel's photographs have shown is that by the time the limousine is going under the underpass, Jack Kennedy is sitting upright. Jackie's obviously tried to put his head back together and has him sitting upright, thinking that she can make it okay. That, of course, does not work. But it's kind of eerie that that was, in fact, her impulse. I'm sure she was in shock and had no idea what she was doing. Now, the testimony from Campbell says, and I'm going to, I'm sorry, this is from Clint Hill. Clint Hill says, as I approached the vehicle, JFK's limousine, there was a third shot. It hit the president in the head, the upper right of the right ear, causing a gaping hole in his head, which caused brain matter, blood, and bone fragments to spew forth over the car, over myself. At that point, Mrs. Kennedy came up out of the back seat of the car onto the trunk of the car. She was trying to retrieve something that had gone off to the right rear. She did not know I was there. At that point, I grabbed Mrs. Kennedy, put her back in her seat. The president fell over onto her lap to his left. So the right side of his head was exposed. I could see his eyes were fixed. There was a hole in the upper right portion of his head about the size of my palm. Most of the gray matter in that area had been removed and was scattered throughout the entire car, including on Mrs. Kennedy. I turned and gave the follow-up car crew the thumbs down, indicating that we were in a very dire situation. So Clint Hill had to know that shot came from the front. And he really leaves no doubt about it. In his 2012 book, Mrs. Kennedy and Me, Clint Hill said, I'm almost there. Mrs. Kennedy's leaning towards the president. I'm almost there. I was almost there. Then I heard the shot, the third shot. The impact was like the sound of something hard hitting something hollow, like the sound of a melon shattering onto cement. The same instant, brain, blood matter, and bone fragments exploded from the back of the president's head. The president's blood, parts of his skull, parts of his brain were splattered all over me, my face, my clothes, my hair. Well, there's no doubt that those are all indications of shooting from the front. And the problem is that the body flame being flown back to Andrews Air Force Base in Washington has evidence of shots from the front. So what is done is that they have to do pre-autopsy surgery. Before the plane leaves Dallas, the body is taken from the ceremonial casket, placed into the hold of the airplane. When they land at Andrews Air Force Base about around 6 o'clock in the evening on the night of the assassination, Bobby Kennedy comes to they have a lift. They get the air casket out. The ceremonial casket is put into a gray ambulance. Bobby Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy get in and they drive off to Bethesda Hospital where the autopsy is going to be done. The problem is that the body's not in that casket. So as it goes forward, Lyndon Johnson gives a short speech. Then all the lights go out and the helicopter is there. And the helicopter, what both David Mantik and I concluded, along with Doug Horn, is that the body was flown to Bethesda directly, or was put into a shipping casket and a black limousine, black ambulance, and driven over to the morgue. And it entered the morgue in that shipping casket. Okay, now there's actually 3 entries of the casket. It becomes a great charade because the Navy personnel who were there attending the autopsy made it clear in their testimony to not only Doug Horn, but also in various testimony they gave to Matson, one of the people who most diligently interviewed the Navy personnel involved in the autopsy, is that Jack Kennedy's body did arrive in a shipping casket. It was brought in, unzipped in a body bag, and prepared for pre-autopsy surgery, which was done by Humes and Boswell to alter the wounds. Ultimately, they were able to get the ceremonial casket reunited with the body and done the autopsy. But there are photographs, and I know that the photographs that we have of the post autopsy surgery, which again are in some dispute, but I myself think that they are legitimate. And there's again debate on this, but I think that the pre-autopsy surgery photographs show the amount of damage that was done to Jack Kennedy's head by Boswell and Hume to remove evidence of frontal shots and to get x-rays taken that were ultimately forged to mask evidence of shots from the front. And when the body was brought out into the gallery for the autopsy to be done, the two FBI agents who were there in the 302 report, O'Neill and Siebert, indicated that there had been discussion of pre-autopsy surgery. I'm sure Dr. Hume realized that people were aghast at how much damage was done to Jack Kennedy's head, and it was clear that even the parietal bone had been sawed away, and then the wounds at Bethesda, when the autopsy began, looked nothing like the wounds at Dallas when the body left. Now, I'm coming up to the top of the hour, and I'm going to stop and take questions. But I think we've gone. No, the book is you can see the book is a long, thorough book, fully footnoted, fully illustrated. I hope to do a deluxe edition of this and actually get an index and to maybe do the photographs in color. The book has become kind of it's become kind of a standard book because of the thoroughness with which the Dr. Mantik's work is presented. And the illustrations, the analysis of it, I think makes indisputable the fact that this was a crossfire that killed Jack Kennedy. All the indications are that the CIA, the government, was deeply involved, which was the theme of my first book, Who Really Killed Jack Kennedy. And the government has covered it up and lied about it for 61 years, which means that this was I think, a full effort by the deep state to just take over and to callously murder a president in full public view and get away with it. And so far, 61 years later, they're still trying to get away with it. And I think today, enough is coming out of the deep state that this will be finally exposed, especially if President Trump in his second term follows through and does declassify all the remaining documents, presuming the remaining documents have not been altered or destroyed. It's been a fight to get the truth out, and I'm pleased that we now have Dr. Mantik's version, and it's very readable. The appendices are scientific and detailed. We go into all the photochemistry and all of the memos, etc., and the discussion of it, all the mathematics, all the optical density physics, all the X-ray techniques of altering X-rays in the 1960s. It's a very comprehensive and very thorough book, and I'm pleased that we've got this on the record now in a format where Dr. Mantik's work is going to be accessible to the public, the general reading public, from this point on. So let me stop with that much and take some questions.
Wow, amazing. Again, every time I hear you give this presentation, I learn something new. It's amazing. The book is fantastic, by the way. I picked it up a while ago. I love it. And it's really it points out everything in great detail, but very simplified so you guys get it. I mean, you've got to have this book. If you've got an arsenal of JFK stuff that you bring out to show your friends, this should be the first thing you pull out. And the second should be Larry Rivera's book, The JFK Horseman. So here we go, Dr. Corsi. We've got questions, I think. So Dr. Corsi, with your deep dive into irrefutable medical evidence of Dr. Mantik's X-ray proof of 3 headshots, it's clear the official narrative is as airtight as a colander.
You're right, that's true.
That the same powers who orchestrated this cover-up are still in many ways pulling strings today. If the citizenry were pawns in the grotesque chess match, knowing that the establishment will sacrifice any piece to maintain the lie, how do we, armed with undeniable evidence like yours, flip the board and force a checkmate for the truth and justice? And we'll just leave it at that before we go on here. Okay.
Well, that's very well stated, and it's a very good question. It's kind of like a David and Goliath fight, and The government has the power, it has the documents, it has the money, but it doesn't have the truth. And I think that Dr. Mantik is to be commended in that he would not put up with a lie, and that he, doggedly, I mean, the meticulous nature of his work is brilliant, and that's what makes it so irrefutable. Now, when you get that clarity of truth, Dr. Mantik can't be ignored any longer. Then you get Michael Chesser, who's an equally brilliant doctor, who independently validated Dr. Mantik's work and says this is all correct. And by the way, when the book came out, I made a point of contacting Robert Kennedy Jr., and he got the book. He asked for a signed copy of the book. And his radiologist, Dr. Edward Fogarty, who's become a good friend, checked out the book independently and told Robert Kennedy that Dr. Mantik's work was airtight correct. So Robert Kennedy's known this now since March when the book was published. And he very generously commented in a phone call that he greatly appreciated the work that Dr. Mantik and I did, and all the scholars, he said, that over the years have worked to get the truth out about what happened to his father and his uncle. He was very generous, very appreciative, very gracious, and very accepting that this was the truth.
Absolutely. That's one good thing about him. I'll just briefly mention I was at an event with him back in COVID land days, and the first question asked of him after his presentation was, "What's happened to the Democratic Party?" And he said, "I haven't got the faintest idea, but I'm not in line with what they're doing right now." And then, of course, within a year and a half, he's out, and everything is, it's shifted to Republican. It's quite amazing. So for him to say that about all of us, that's really amazing. All you researchers, not me.
He said it was very inclusive. He said all the scholars and researchers who over the decades have done this work, that he's followed it and he's very appreciative. Now, he didn't mention anybody by name, but he was including this large body of work that has developed, and he was very appreciative of all the work that has been brought forward. And I think the scientific evidence that Dr. Mantik has is kind of the indisputable proof. It's the conclusive, you can't get past this. Okay. And so therefore, the remainder of the question that was stated was very good, because the person is saying, if the citizens were pawns in this grotesque chess match, knowing the establishment will sacrifice any peace to maintain the lie, how do we, armed with undeniable evidence like yours, flip the board, force a checkmate for the truth and justice? What strategy do you see that primes the public for a long overdue revival of JFK truth while outmaneuvering the institutional gatekeepers still holding the evidence hostage? And let me ask you this: do you think the brazen success of the JFK cover-up emboldened the same powers behind RFK, MLK, U.S. Liberty, 9/11, COVID? Yes, I do. I think that they now felt as if they are running a Truman Show, and we are their pawns, and they have now control of the media, and they can lie to us about anything they want to lie to us about. I mean, why do buildings that were not hit by the airplanes in 9/11 come down? Why they were told there were weapons of mass destruction when we invaded Iraq to go after Saddam Hussein. Colin Powell told that to the United Nations. We didn't find any. Why is a bad pandemic turned out, bad flu made into a worldwide pandemic, and a vaccine that doesn't stop you from getting the disease end up killing you? So, I mean, I think finally we've had enough accumulation of lying that it is coming forward to be understood by the American people that this deep state is evil, depopulationist. I think they want greed, power, money, and I think people are catching on. Perpetual war, bankers making profit. You know, it's the things that we've been seeing in the conspiracy theories today are becoming conspiracy fact. And this,
Absolutely. Yes,
and
that is the bottom line, isn't it? And you have a great podcast. Tell everybody about how to get to your podcast because I listen to it weekly.
my podcast is thetruthcentral.com. Thetruthcentral.com. I do podcasts, and we also have a website called gods5stones.com, a 501c3, which is GODS, no apostrophe, spell out five, FIVESTONES, plural, gods5stones.com. And we found algorithms, cryptographic schemes, the State Board of Election uh, voter registration databases that permit the creation and voting of falsified records. And this exposed how the mail-in ballot scheme was done. And by the way, it is now going to be the centerpiece of the analysis being done by President Trump's lawyers who are going after the voting fraud.
And
We're
if I,
working.
Jerome, am I correct? Are you presenting on that tomorrow? Yes, you are at 12
Yes,
noon Central.
12
So
noon tomorrow.
everybody, you've got something to look forward to tomorrow. Dr. Corsi will be back with us. And I want to thank you, Dr. Corsi, for being with us and an extraordinary presentation. And of course, David's work is, exemplary.
Well,
So there
it's a
we go.
great honor to have done this book with David, and it's a great honor to do the presentation, to explain his work. And God bless everybody here and all the good work being done, which I've read and studied over the years. I'm enormously appreciative of myself.
Yes, great. We'll see you tomorrow.
I look
Thank
forward to
you.
it.
Good
Thank you very
night.
much. Good night.